Hello everyone, patch 13.6 is just around the corner, and today I want to talk about a new meme comp on the patch that from the right spot can actually lead to great results. The core of this comp is that with the right setup, both Vander and Vlad can be unkillable and scale to do ridiculous damage. Let's talk about why this works. 4 Watcher, 3 Family Vander gets a lot of durability from both traits, and Vander's ability grants him a ton of armor and magic resist, which means that if he has a reliable source of health, he will have a perfect combination of tank stats. Vander also has a passive that makes him do more damage on his ult for every 1 or 2 cost on his board. To activate 4 Watcher and 3 Family, you're going to be playing 5 of them anyway, which means the base damage of his ult goes from 400 base AD to 900 base AD. Additionally, his resists scale with AP. This means that Vander scales really well with both AD and AP. As a result, this makes him a really good Titans user, because the item makes him both more tanky and make him do a lot more damage. And because he's doing damage, having a source of sustain is a great way to give himself the health he needs. In fact, this build on Vander isn't even that unheard of. At the start of PBE for this set, Titans BT Vander was an absolute menace on PBE to the point where they had to completely gut his passive. But over the course of the set, Vander's slowly been getting a lot of that power back. Now, Vlad also has a durability trait and a healing ability, which means that if he has a source of armor, he also will have the tank stat trifecta. There happens to be an anomaly that gives armor and MR based on AP, and there's also an item that gives infinitely scaling AP. Double Archangels gives Vlad enough healing to be nearly unkillable, and the damage to actually kill units, so if you were to have access to a good source of resists, you'll be unstoppable. It also turns out that both Vander and Vlad happen to both be 2-cost Watchers, which means you can easily reroll both of them together. Additionally, their items don't really contest each other, so if you don't have items for one, you'll probably be able to have items for the other. And for most of the set, this comp has been a high roll only type of situation, similar to Hungry Crab Urgot, where if you hit, you can easily win out, but getting to that point is incredibly difficult. However, on the upcoming patch, this comp is actually quite stable and is a lot easier to play, and thus the low rolls aren't nearly as bad as before. On the new patch, there are 5 buffs to talk about as to why this comp might be suddenly playable. Buffs to Amumu's damage reduction makes them a lot more stable in the early game. Powder's also getting a nice damage buff, which makes her actually really effective at killing units and helps you save more health in the early game. Probably the biggest buff that is coming in the next patch is Vander getting an AD buff from 50 to 55, which increases his damage by 10%. Additionally, he's also getting armor and magic resist, which makes him much more stable in the early game. Watcher is also getting its minimum durability increased, which is a small but noticeable buff. The biggest takeaway from all 5 of these buffs is that the comp is much more stable on your level 6 board. Now, the components you want to prioritize aren't as intuitive as you might think. The most important component in this comp by far is tier. The reason for that is because all of Vladimir's items require a tier, and the other units can use tier items. Archangel's Adaptive Helm all need a tier to be built. Also, Hand of Justice is the best way to use up a glove in the early game, but in order to make that you also need a tier. Your secondary units can also very easily use tier items such as Redemption on Garen and tier items onto Powder. The next most important item is Cloak because it builds into a Vladimir item, a Vander item, and an Evan Shroud, which is pretty important for the comp. The items you want to look for in the early game include 1 Archangels for Vlad. This can be left on Powder in the early game, but if you don't have an Archangels, the odds that you're able to actually play around Vlad in the late game are much lower. But after that, you want to prioritize Vander because he is much stronger in the early game and he'll be what keeps your board stable. Titans plus BT are pretty easy to make because they use a lot of unique components that you would be able to get rid of easily. Vander's last item is pretty flexible. The core is that you want something that either gives AD, AP, or sustain. A second Titans, a second Bloodthirster, a Hand of Justice, Giant Slayer, Infinity Edge, all of those are pretty great options. Vladimir's items are a bit more rigid. 1 Archangels is mandatory for Vladimir to come online, which is why you need to prioritize getting at least 1 early. Next, in order for Vlad to be stable, you need some sort of armor and magic resist, which you can get for your Anomaly best case scenario, but if not, having a backup as a regular item is pretty important. Adaptive Helm is a really good item on Vladimir because it gives him a good amount of resists early on, and it helps him generate mana, which makes him heal more, which makes him more tanky. Gargoyles is an acceptable substitute, but it's pretty much worse in every regard. He needs to be getting targeted by a lot of units for it to have more resist than Adaptive Helm, and he also don't have the mana passive. Your last item is just going to be something that gives Vlad a lot of AP, preferably a second Archangels, but any AP item would work here. The only other important item to make for this comp, as previously mentioned, is Evan Shroud. The reason for this is because Vander's healing is dependent on his damage. Therefore, Ebon Shroud making Vander do more damage will make him heal more, which will make him more tanky. Apart from that, any leftover tank items can go onto Garen, any leftover damage items can go onto Powder. If you aren't able to get to Powder 3, but you have an Echo 2, you can also move the Powder items onto Echo. Your 3-star priority is going to be Vander and then Vlad, but both of these are pretty important, but Vander's a bit more important in the early game, so having him 3-starred early helps you save more health. Powder is also pretty important because she's the only backliner, and as a result, she's gonna do a lot of damage anyway, so there's pretty much no reason not to 3-star her. Amumu can be 3-starred if you get it for free, but shouldn't really be prioritized. Amumu at least gets pretty tanky even without any item investment, so if you have the means to get an Amumu 3 for free, then you might as well do it, but if it starts clogging up your bench, the first thing that you would sell would be the Amumu. Darius and Violet 3 are pretty item dependent to be good, so because they aren't getting any items, you should not hold more than a Darius 2 or a Violet 2. On stage 2, you're just looking to hold as many of the relevant units as possible. On 3-2, you want to roll and try to hit this board, which is 4 Watcher and 3 Family. Now, Scar is Now what's interesting to note is that Scar is actually kind of a bait here because he costs quite a bit of gold to hold, and replacing either an Amumu or a Darius with a Scar will actually make Vander do less damage because of his passive. As a result, you really should not be looking to hold any copies of Scar until you have your Vladimir and your Vander 3-starred. Garen and Echo are a little tricky. Garen and Echo should definitely be held onto, but may not necessarily go onto your board yet. Once you have Vlad and Vander 3-starred, and preferably Powder as well, you want to look to level up to 9 and play 6 Watcher and then Echo additionally. 6 Watcher isn't actually that high of a priority, so it might make more sense to play 5 Watcher plus Echo on 8 if you're able to. The only exceptions to that would probably be if you hit something like a 6 cost. Now let's talk about anomalies, which are the make or break for this comp. By far the best option to hit is Mage Armor, as this makes Vladimir literally unkillable if you position him remotely decently. Having double Archangels with Mage Armor gives Vladimir an incredible amount of resistances, and with the durability he already has from Watcher and the healing he has from his ability, it is pretty much impossible to kill a Vladimir unless they have like a 3-star 4 cost or something stronger. The next best option would be Thornskin onto Vander, and the reason for this is quite interesting. Vander actually has the highest damage mitigation out of any unit in this set, and Thornskin's damage scales off of the amount of damage reduced. So when Vander has his ability up, he actually does an incredible amount of damage to enemies around him, which actually gives him a ton of power. If you position Vander in front of enemy carries, you can easily ramp up thousands of damage just from being hit. Other good anomalies for Vladimir include Bulwark, Slime Time, Dramatic Entrance, and Stoneskin. Bulwark is essentially a budget Mage Armor, where it gives a really good amount of armor and magic resist, but it doesn't have the infinite scaling that Mage Armor has, and therefore the ceiling is not nearly as high. Slime Time is really interesting, and I think is one of the most misunderstood anomalies. The reason for that is that Slime Time is a tank anomaly. People don't really realize that, but the whole point of this anomaly is to hit as many units as possible and to heal off of the damage. Vladimir being played with double Archangels makes it so that he also heals a ton, and even though he has a lot of healing already from his ability, they can kind of offset each other, and as a result it makes Vladimir really tanky. Dramatic Entrance is also really good because it buys time for Vladimir to stack Archangels a little bit, and it provides a board-wide stun for free. And while the max health isn't that important for Vladimir, it's definitely better than any of the not armor and magic resist tank anomalies. And then Stoneskin is probably a worse version of Bulwark. It helps him ramp up early, but towards the end of the fight, you kind of want Vladimir to be able to not die, and Stoneskin's effect is already worn off by then. Other good Vander anomalies include Slime Time for practically the same reason, except the interaction is a little bit different. Vander gets a pretty decent amount of AP from stuff like Titans, because you want to scale your armor and magic resist anyway. It also gives him a lot of healing, which is really valuable considering all the durability and armor and magic resist makes him really, really tanky. So any source of healing is much, much more valuable on him. Berserker Rage isn't a good option. It's basically 1.5 Titans worth of stats onto Vander, which makes him do more damage and makes him more tanky. Power Up is a pretty interesting one, because if you're stable enough to take it, you will get a lot of damage for free, as Vander and Vladimir both rack up a ton of damage in these fights, and you can very easily translate this into a lot of free AD. and AD is more healing, and more healing is more tankiness. Comeback Story is kind of the same thing, except it's kind of more upfront value. It's less risky to take than Power Up, but it doesn't have the same ceiling. And then Diving In is an interesting one because it provides a source of healing, which can be pretty helpful for Vander, but it also can help him get backline access, which is really important for Vander. If you're hitting a tank, he might do less damage because they might have like armor and magic resist, or they might have durability, which makes him do less damage. But if he dives in and he just starts hitting the backline, not only is he dealing more damage and healing more, he's also killing the backline. So it can definitely be a really strong option, especially if you can punish bad positioning. Your augment priority, you want to look for early econ because you want to be able to hit Vander and Vlad as soon as possible and have enough gold to roll for a good anomaly. There are a couple combat augments that should be taken at all times. The one that I want to talk about the most is long distance pals, because both Vander and Vlad scale nearly infinitely, and if you long distance pals the two of them, they both become pretty much unkillable, and this is by far the best combat augment you can take in this comp. You can see other augment choices here. For emblems, I would say the only one that like kind of is okay is Family Emblem. It's not that important, but Family Emblem can be pretty good onto Vlad. If you already have your 3 Vlad items, you can put Family Emblem onto Echo or onto Garen. It helps a little bit, but it's not that significant. Other emblems really aren't worth taking, at least early on. Watcher Emblem can be okay late game, but I would not take it before 4-2, and even then, I probably wouldn't take, because you don't really need it, because you don't really want to replace a Mumu or Darius, because you're losing damage onto Vander if you do. Now with this comp, if you can get online, and if you get a good anomaly, you can very easily play for first. If you have one of the 2 S-tier anomalies, you're almost certainly playing for first. Now I've already posted this onto the competitive TFT Reddit, and I've already been getting clowned for it, but I also got clowned for Renata Reroll, and we saw how that turned out. So I'm pretty hopeful that this will be a pretty strong comp in the upcoming patch. That's all I've got. If you like this comp, let me know what you think about the comp in the comments below. If you like the content, be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you all for watching.